Rome, 65 AD, a villa on the outskirts of the city 3 miles from the Forum. The night is silent except for the distant sound of the Tiber moving through its banks. Inside the villa, oil lamps cast a trembling light across shelves of papyrus scrolls, across the face of an old man sitting at a writing table with his hands folded in his lap. His name is Lucius Annaeus Seneca. He is 69 years old. He was once the most powerful private citizen in the Roman Empire. Tonight, a messenger has delivered a single sealed document from the Palatine Hill, and Seneca has read it twice very slowly and then set it down on the table without expression. The document is an order from Emperor Nero. It instructs Seneca to take his own life before dawn. Seneca does not weep. He does not call for his servants to arm themselves. He does not attempt to flee. He sits in the lamplight and looks at the walls of his study walls lined with everything he has ever written about mercy, about justice, about the fundamental dignity of every human soul. He has spent 40 years writing letters to a man named Lucilius. Letters about how to live, about how to face death, about what it means to be human in a world that constantly tries to strip that humanity away. He picks up his pen. He begins to write one final letter. And in that letter, he does not describe his fear. He describes what he has seen. He describes 16 years inside the orbit of the most powerful empire the world has ever known. He describes what he watched Rome do to human bodies, in human minds, in human memory, in the name of order, in the name of the gods, in the name of civilization itself. This is that letter. This is what Seneca saw, Rome 49 AD. Seneca is 53 years old and he has just returned from 8 years of exile on the island of Corsica. 8 years of isolation that the Emperor Claudius imposed on him for reasons that were never entirely clear and never needed to be. That is one of the first things you learn about Roman power. It does not need to justify itself. It simply acts, and the act becomes the justification. Seneca walks back into Rome on a cold morning in November, and the city hits him like a physical force. The noise, the smell, the sheer mass of human bodies moving through narrow streets, the vendors and the slaves and the senators in their white togas, and the soldiers standing at intervals on the corners with their hands resting on the handles of their swords. He has missed this city every day of his exile. Now that he is back inside it, he feels something he cannot immediately name. He will eventually understand that what he feels is the machinery, not the city itself, but the system underneath the city, the invisible architecture of control that holds everything together. He could not feel it properly when he was young and inside it. Exile gave him distance, and distance gave him eyes. On his second day back in Rome, he is walking through the Forum when he sees a man being dragged through the crowd by 2 soldiers. The man is perhaps 40 years old, broad-shouldered, with a face that might once have been handsome. He is not fighting the soldiers. He is simply walking with them in a way that suggests every remaining choice has already been removed from him. The crowd parts to let them through and then closes again behind them, and Seneca notices that almost no one in the crowd watches them for more than a few seconds. The sight of a man being taken is simply not remarkable enough to hold attention for long. Seneca follows. He does not know why. Perhaps it is the philosopher in him, the part that has always needed to see things clearly before he can write about them. He follows at a distance and watches the soldiers deliver the man to a lower court official, and he listens to the charge being read aloud. The man has murdered his mother. In Rome, this is not simply a crime. It is a rupture in the fabric of the universe, a violation so fundamental that the law does not merely punish it. The law performs the punishment as ritual. Seneca watches what happens next. The ceremony is called poena culae, the punishment of the sack. It is documented in the 12 Tables, Rome's oldest legal code, written 400 years earlier on bronze tablets in the Forum. The condemned man is beaten first with blood-red rods until his back is stripped open. Then he is forced into a large leather sack made from ox hide, and into the sack with him go 4 animals, a dog, a rooster, a monkey, and a viper. Each animal carries symbolic meaning that the jurists have codified with the precision of architects. The dog represents shamelessness. The rooster represents arrogance. The monkey represents malicious cunning. The viper represents the poisonous hatred a man must carry in his heart to kill the woman who gave him life. The sack is sewn shut. The sack is thrown into the Tiber. Seneca watches all of it, and what strikes him most is not the violence. He has read about violence. What strikes him is the order, the sequence, the way each step follows the previous step with the inevitability of a religious ceremony, which is exactly what it is. He thinks about Cicero, who once wrote the words that are spoken aloud at the moment the sack enters the water. Let him be denied the sky, the sun, the water, and the earth. Whoever has taken the life of the one who gave him life must be stripped of all the elements that sustain existence itself. And he thinks about something else, something that he will not write about for several more years because it takes time to find the words for a thing that is so deeply uncomfortable. Cicero himself once defended a man accused of killing his father. The man's name was Sextus Roscius, and Cicero argued brilliantly and won, and the man went free. The system is not consistent. It has never been consistent. It only needs to appear consistent. The ritual of Pina Colle is not really about this one man who drowned in a leather sack with a rooster and a monkey and a snake. It is about the 50,000 people who did not drown in the sack and who now understand with absolute clarity that they could. The system does not need to be fair. It needs to be believable. This is the first thing Seneca learns upon returning to Rome. In the weeks that follow, he walks the city with different eyes. He stands beneath the Capitoline Hill and looks up at the southern cliff face, a sheer wall of limestone that rises 25 meters above the forum floor. The Romans call it the Tarpeian Rock, and they named it for a girl named Tarpeia, who, according to legend, opened the city gates to the Sabine army during the founding wars in exchange for the gold bracelets they wore on their left arms. The Sabines entered the city, and then they gave her exactly what they had on their left arms, their bronze shields. She was crushed to death beneath the weight of them, and the Romans turned her death into a monument to the price of betrayal. Everything in Rome is a monument to the price of something. The Tarpeian Rock is the place where traitors are thrown. Not executed in a private room, not poisoned quietly, not strangled in a cell. Thrown, carried to the edge by soldiers while the forum below fills with citizens who come to watch, and then released into the air, and the body strikes the rocks below, and the rocks below are visible from the forum floor, and the message is written in the most legible language Rome has ever invented, which is the language of consequence made visible. Seneca researches the history of the rock and discovers the case of Marcus Manlius Capitolinus, a Roman general who had once saved the city from a Gallic invasion, a hero whose name was spoken in the same breath as Romulus and Camillus. Manlius heard the sacred geese of Juno honking in alarm during a Gallic night raid and woke the garrison in time to repel the attack. Rome gave him the name Capitolinus and honored him with gifts and celebrations. Years later, the Senate accused him of aspiring to tyranny. The evidence was thin. The real concern was that he had become too beloved by the poor, too dangerous to the existing order. They threw him from the rock that bore his name. Seneca sits with this for a long time. He turns it over the way you turn a stone in your hand, feeling its edges. The lesson is not what it appears to be on the surface. The lesson is not that traitors will be punished. The lesson is subtler and more terrifying. The lesson is that in Rome, your actions do not determine your guilt. The intention attributed to you by those with the power to attribute intention, that is what determines your guilt. Manlius did not commit treason. He was assigned treason. And once it was assigned, all his years of service and all his victories and all his saved Roman lives became irrelevant. Seneca looks at the Tarpeian Rock and asks himself quietly, privately, in the way a man asks himself a question he is not sure he wants answered. Is there an intention being attributed to me right now, somewhere in a room I cannot see, by a man I may never meet? He does not write this question down. Not yet. Instead, he walks to the military quarter of the city and finds an old soldier named Gaius Petronius, a veteran of the Rhine campaigns who served under the general Aulus Plautius. Petronius is in his 60s with the kind of face that has been permanently rearranged by weather and violence. Seneca buys him a cup of wine and asks him about decimation. Petronius goes quiet for a moment that lasts exactly long enough to tell Seneca everything he needs to know about what decimation costs the men who survive it. Decimation. From the Latin decimare, to take the 10th part. When a Roman legion displayed cowardice in battle or mutinied or suffered catastrophic defeat through negligence, the commanding general could order the punishment. The soldiers of the affected unit would be divided into groups of 10. In each group, they would draw lots. The man who drew the marked stone was condemned. But the execution was not carried out by a centurion or a magistrate or any official representative of the state. It was carried out by the other 9 men in the group, with clubs and rocks. They beat their own comrade to death, a man they had trained beside for years, a man who had pulled them out of river crossings and shared his bread on frozen campaign nights and held them when they were sick with fever in Germanic forests. They killed this man because the lot fell on him, and the lot fell on him because chance is the purest form of state authority. Chance cannot be bribed. It cannot be argued with. It cannot be appealed. Petronius stares into his wine. He says he has not slept a full night since the Rhine campaign. Seneca writes in his notebook that evening, Rome does not need you to be loyal. Rome needs you to be unable to be anything else. A man who has killed his brother in arms on state orders has surrendered his soul entirely to the custody of the state. He has nothing left that belongs only to him. He is the statesman completely not because he chose to be, but because the choice was surgically removed from him on a day he cannot stop reliving. After decimation, the survivors were further humiliated. They were forbidden to sleep inside the camp walls. They ate barley instead of wheat, the food of animals, not men. Every day was a reminder of what they had done and why they had done it and who had made them do it. The state did not need to imprison them. They carried their prison inside their own bodies. This is the second thing Seneca learns. The most durable chains are the ones you cannot see. Now Seneca must move forward in his own account because the years between 49 and 54 AD are not empty years. They are the years in which Agrippina, mother of the young Prince Nero, arranges for Seneca to serve as the boy's tutor and moral instructor. Seneca teaches the young Nero rhetoric and philosophy and the principles of Stoic governance. He watches the boy closely during these 5 years. He is brilliant, that much is clear. He absorbs lessons quickly and then sets them aside with equal quickness when something more interesting presents itself. Seneca teaches him about the lives of great men. Nero listens and then asks to hear about the deaths of great men instead. Seneca notices this. He writes it in his notebook and then crosses it out. It is 54 AD now. Claudius is dead, almost certainly poisoned, and Rome has a new emperor. Nero is 17 years old. He is by all early accounts a young man of genuine intelligence, artistic sensitivity, and extraordinary personal charm. When he ascends to power, he summons Seneca to a formal reception room on the Palatine Hill. The room is enormous and deliberately so designed to make every visitor feel small and therefore appropriately oriented toward the man at the center of it. Nero is seated on a gilded chair that stops just short of being a throne. He is wearing a purple-bordered toga and has the kind of face that painters would spend centuries trying to capture. Open, curious, slightly too aware of its own beauty. He looks at Seneca for a long moment and then asks, in a voice that is younger than his authority, "What form of punishment do you believe is most effective in maintaining the order of a civilization?" Seneca gives him the answer he believes. He says clemency, the calculated and visible practice of mercy, because fear is a temporary adhesive and it weakens over time, but the memory of being spared creates a loyalty that compounds. Nero listens to this answer with great attentiveness and then smiles. Seneca will spend the next 11 years trying to decide what that smile meant, 57 AD, 3 years into Nero's reign. Seneca is now 61 years old and has more influence than any private citizen in Rome. He has helped Nero draft legislation that reduced the worst excesses of the gladiatorial games. He has argued successfully against several proposed executions. He believes still that he is steering something. A small slave revolt has been suppressed near Capua. 43 slaves killed in the fighting, 2 Roman soldiers dead. By any historical measure, it is a minor incident, the kind that happens in an empire built on forced labor every few months. Nero decides it requires a demonstration. He orders the crucifixion of 400 slaves from the affected estates. Seneca stands on the upper terrace of a friend's estate overlooking the Via Appia and watches them work. The soldiers are efficient. They have done this before, many of them, and it shows in the economy of their movements, the way they position the crossbeam, the precise angles they choose for the nails to avoid the major veins and arteries, and thereby extend the duration of the ordeal. Crucifixion is not a death penalty in the sense that most people understand the term. It is not designed to kill, it is designed to display. Death arrives eventually after hours or days through asphyxiation because the weight of the body hanging from nailed wrists collapses the lungs and the crucified man must push himself upward on his nailed feet to inhale. And every breath is an act of will against unbearable pain, and eventually the will gives out. The Romans have even designed a small wooden ledge called a settle that can be attached to the vertical beam at hip height. This is not a mercy. Seneca understands this immediately and clearly. The settle allows the condemned man to rest his weight slightly, to catch his breath, to survive a little longer. Its purpose is not to reduce suffering. Its purpose is to extend suffering, to stretch the display across more hours, to ensure that more travelers on the Via Appia walk past the dying bodies while they are still alive enough to make sounds. The crucifixion of 6,000 slaves after Spartacus's rebellion 50 years earlier had stretched for 200 kilometers along this same road. Travelers approaching Rome from the south had walked through a corridor of crucified men for an entire day's journey. Seneca stands on the terrace and looks at the 400 crosses going up and thinks about engineering. Not the engineering of wood and iron, but the engineering of perception. Whoever designed this system understood something fundamental about the relationship between spectacle and obedience. They understood that a punishment witnessed is worth 1,000 punishments merely heard about. And then Seneca understands something about himself that he has been avoiding for 3 years. He thinks I did not design this. But I work for the man who ordered it, and I stood on this terrace and I watched, and I said nothing. And tomorrow I will go back to the Palatine Hill and advise the same man on matters of state, and I will use the word governance, and I will mean something by it that no longer corresponds to any reality I can observe from where I am standing. He goes home and writes a letter to Lucilius. He does not mention what he saw. He writes about Stoic philosophy instead, about the importance of distinguishing between things within our control and things outside it. It is the most dishonest letter he has ever written. He knows it when he writes it, and he sends it anyway because the alternative is to write the truth, and the truth is a document that could be read by the wrong person at the wrong time, and Seneca has spent too many years in exile already to risk another. The most durable chains are the ones you cannot see. He wrote that sentence in his notebook 6 years ago. He did not understand then that he was writing about himself. 59. A.D. Nero has his mother Agrippina murdered. The official story is that she was plotting against him. The story whispered in every dining room in Rome is that Agrippina had simply become inconvenient, too powerful, too ambitious, too much of a reminder that Nero's throne came through her blood and not his own merit. He sends a group of men to her villa by the sea. They stab her repeatedly. According to the historian Tacitus, whose account will survive long after everyone in this story is dust, Agrippina's final words when she understood what was happening were strike the womb that bore him. Seneca is asked to draft the Senate's official response to Agrippina's death, a document explaining why her death was justified and necessary for the security of the empire. He writes it. He uses the word necessity 4 times. He uses the word security 3 times. He does not use the word murder at all. He signs his name to the document. This is the moment, not the moment Seneca fails to stop a crucifixion or fails to intervene in a decimation or remain silent while a slave revolt is suppressed with disproportionate violence. Those are moments of inaction, and inaction carries its own weight of guilt, but remains philosophically a different category of failure. This is a moment of action. He picks up his pen and he writes lies on behalf of a man who killed his own mother, and he puts his name on those lies and he sends them to the Senate, and the Senate reads them and nods because the Senate has been reading documents like this for 300 years and will continue to read documents like this for 300 more. He is no longer a witness to the machinery. He is one of its components. He goes home that night and sits in his study for a long time without writing anything. He thinks about a sentence he has used in lectures, a sentence about how a man's character is revealed, not by what he says about virtue, but by what he does when virtue becomes costly. He thinks about it for a long time. Then he opens his notebook to a fresh page and writes nothing, because there is nothing to write that would make what he has done today into something that philosophy can accommodate. 61. A.D. The Games. Nero has been developing an interest in spectacle that goes beyond anything his predecessors imagined. The traditional gladiatorial contests are not enough for him. He wants mythology. He wants the crowd to feel that they are watching not a mere execution, but a story, and he has discovered that the easiest way to make an execution feel like a story is to dress it in the costumes of the stories people already know. A condemned man is brought into the arena wearing a costume that the crowd recognizes immediately. He is dressed as Orpheus, the legendary musician, whose playing was so beautiful that it could tame wild animals. He carries a lyre. He is placed in the center of the sand with the lyre in his hands, and for a moment there is complete silence, in a stadium holding 50,000 people, the kind of silence that only forms when an enormous crowd becomes collectively uncertain about what it is about to experience. The man plays the lyre. His hands are shaking, but he plays. He has been told, or he has allowed himself to believe, that perhaps the music will matter, that perhaps something in the theater of all this will be satisfied by the performance, and the door beneath the sand will not open. The door opens. A bear emerges from the underground passages of the hypogeum, the complex network of tunnels and cages beneath the arena floor. The bear has been kept without food for 3 days and harassed with heated iron rods at irregular intervals to ensure a particular quality of aggression. It sees the man with the lyre and moves toward him without hesitation. The crowd roars. Seneca is sitting in the section reserved for senators and their invited guests. He is close enough to the arena floor to see the man's face clearly. He watches what happens. He does not look away. He believes perhaps incorrectly that looking away would be a form of cowardice greater than watching. If the man must experience this, the least Seneca can do is bear witness to it. He goes home afterward and writes what will become one of his most quoted passages. I return from such spectacles, more cruel and inhuman, because I have been among humans. I come back a changed man, and something that was inside me has been diminished. But he goes again the next time. Because Nero attends and Nero expects his senior advisors to be present, and absence is itself a statement, and Seneca is not yet ready to make that statement. He tells himself this every time. He has been telling himself this for years. The sentence has started to sound different to him lately. It has started to sound less like a strategic calculation and more like an excuse, which may be the same thing viewed from different distances. 64 AD. AD, the Great Fire of Rome. It begins on the night of July 18th in the Merchant District near the Circus Maximus, and it burns for 6 days and 7 nights, consuming 10 of the city's 14 districts. 300,000 people lose their homes. 2 of Rome's most sacred temples are destroyed. The ancient records in the city archives, records stretching back to the founding of Rome itself, are ash. Nero is in Antium when the fire starts. He returns to Rome and, by most accounts, takes the disaster seriously, organizing relief efforts and opening his own palace grounds as temporary shelter for the displaced. But the city wants explanation. The city always wants explanation when catastrophe arrives, because catastrophe without explanation implies that the universe is random and indifferent, and a random and indifferent universe is far more terrifying than one that punishes specific people for specific reasons. Nero gives them an explanation. He blames the Christians. The Christians are a small religious community, at this point in Rome, recently arrived from the eastern provinces, with unusual customs and an unusual theology that has already made them objects of suspicion among more traditional Romans. They are convenient. They are sufficiently foreign to be credibly guilty of anything. Nero orders mass arrests. What follows is called by historians the Neronian persecution. Seneca is in his late 60s, now exhausted, and has been trying for years to quietly reduce his influence over Nero, rather than increase it. But he is present for part of what happens next, because men in his position are always present. That is precisely the trap of his position, and he cannot leave without it becoming the kind of statement he is not ready to make. The method of execution Nero's engineers have designed for the Christian prisoners is called mors per ignum, death by slow fire. The condemned are wrapped in garments soaked in wax resin and pitch materials chosen for specific combustion properties, for the way they hold a flame steady and slow, rather than producing a quick consuming blaze. The wrapped figures are affixed to poles in the imperial gardens on the Vatican Hill. They are set alight at dusk. Nero rides through his gardens in a golden chariot while they burn. Seneca stands at the edge of the garden. The smell reaches him before the light does. He will not describe the smell in any surviving text. Some things refuse to be translated into language without destroying the language in the process. He stands at the edge and watches the light from dying human bodies illuminate the flower beds of the imperial garden, watches it flicker across the white gravel paths and the carefully tended rose bushes, and he thinks about what he is watching. He is watching a man use other men's suffering as decoration, as atmosphere, as garden lighting. The calculation beneath this is simple and Roman and completely consistent with everything Seneca has been observing for 15 years. Power must make itself visible. Power must convert the most fundamental acts of existence, even the act of dying, into demonstrations of who controls what. Nero does not burn these people because he genuinely believes they started the fire. He burns them because the burning is a sentence written in the most permanent ink available. Read by everyone present, understood by everyone who understands what power is and what it requires of the people closest to it. In this place, Seneca looks at the ground beneath his feet and feels something that he cannot name, precisely a vertigo that is not physical. The sensation of standing at the intersection of what Rome is and what Rome cannot conceive of becoming. He does not know that 17 centuries from now, this hill, this specific garden where he is standing, will be the site of the largest Christian church in the world. The people burning on these poles tonight will become the foundational martyrs of a faith that will outlast the empire that is burning them. The ground beneath Seneca's feet will become the most visited religious site on earth. Some ironies are too vast to be visible from inside them. He is standing inside one of the largest ironies in human history, and he can feel only the heat and the smell and the specific quality of silence that settles over a crowd watching something it knows it should not be watching, but cannot stop watching because the watching itself has been made into an act of loyalty. He finds a week later, while working in the library attached to the palace complex, a collection of texts by the Greek historian and physician Ctesias of Cnidus. Ctesias spent 17 years at the Persian royal court in the 5th century BC, and he recorded Persian customs and judicial practices in a text called Persica. The relevant passage describes an execution method reserved for the gravest crimes against the Persian state, a method the Greeks called scaphismus. Seneca reads the description the way a physician reads a case study, attending to every detail not for pleasure, but for understanding. The condemned man is stripped and positioned between two wooden boats or hollowed logs crafted to fit his body precisely, with openings cut to allow his head, hands, and feet to protrude. He is force-fed milk and honey until he develops severe diarrhea. The same mixture is then applied generously to his exposed face and extremities. He is set adrift on a stagnant pond or positioned in a marsh under full sun. The sun and the sweetness do their work. Flies come first, then wasps, then the slower arrivals that come after the first insects have done their preliminary damage. The man cannot raise his hands to brush them away. He lies between the boats while insects feed on him and deposit their eggs in the wounds that form and spread, and the warmth of his body and the sweetness of the honey accelerate every biological process. And the infection that results spreads with a patience that makes even Roman cruelty look hurried and imprecise by comparison. Ctesias records cases of men enduring this condition for more than 2 weeks before dying of the accumulated effects of sepsis, dehydration, and the systematic consumption of living tissue. Seneca sits with these numbers. He counts backward through the days. He tries to construct in his mind a coherent image of what the 7th day feels like, or the 12th, and then stops because the exercise is causing him a form of distress that he cannot justify philosophically and cannot escape emotionally. And a philosopher who cannot justify his distress philosophically has discovered something important about the limits of a philosophy. He finds also in the library files an unsigned proposal written in the formal administrative language of a bureaucratic memorandum suggesting the possible application of methods derived from Persian practice to certain categories of political prisoner. The document is several years old. It appears never to have been formally considered. It may have been drafted by a junior official seeking advancement. It may have been drafted by someone with a specific prisoner ready in mind. Seneca does not send a formal rebuttal to Nero. He has long since understood that formal rebuttals accomplish nothing when the decision has already been made at a level above the document's official status. He writes instead in his private journal, in the compressed script he uses when writing for himself alone. The reason Rome has not adopted this method is not that Rome found it unconscionable. Rome has found nothing unconscionable that served its purposes. The method is logistically demanding. It requires stable water, specific environmental conditions, and produces results that cannot be displayed publicly, given the extended timeline involved. The empire runs on spectacular visible punishment that crowds can attend and remember and repeat to their children. Scaphism is too slow and too private for Roman institutional purposes. What prevents its use here is not mercy, it is operational preference. These are not the same thing, and confusing them is one of the ways a civilization lies to itself about what it is. He closes the journal. 65 AD, spring, the Pisonian conspiracy, a broad coalition of senators, equestrians, and military officers, has organized an assassination plot against Nero. The plot is discovered before it can be executed. Nero's response is immediate in total and precisely calibrated to the lesson he intends to teach, which is the lesson that Rome has always taught most effectively, which is that the consequences of resistance are not proportional to the resistance itself. They are designed to exceed it. They are designed to reach into spaces far beyond the conspiracy itself to touch people who were adjacent to it, people who heard rumors about it, people who had no connection to it at all, but whose loyalty has not been sufficiently demonstrated lately. Among the names on the arrest list is Gaius Calpurnius Piso, the conspiracy's nominal leader. And among the names connected to Piso's circle in a relationship so peripheral as to be nearly invisible is the name of Lucius Annaeus Seneca. Seneca has known for 2 years that something like this was coming. Not this specific conspiracy, but something shaped like it. He has been quietly reducing his public role, returning financial gifts to Nero, withdrawing from advisory functions, trying to make himself smaller and less consequential, and therefore less worth the effort of a formal accusation. He has retreated to his writing and to his villa and to his letters. It has not been enough. He sits in his study on the night the messenger arrives. He reads the sealed document twice. He sets it down. He has perhaps 6 hours before dawn. The order is clear. He is to end his own life before the sun rises. He calls for his friends. Several of them come quickly, understanding from the tone of the summons that there is no time to waste. He asks them not to weep. He calls for his wife Paulina, who arrives and tells him immediately that she intends to die alongside him. He dissuades her with the gentleness of someone who has thought about this possibility for longer than the other person realizes. He tells her he needs her to live. He tells her someone must carry the letters forward. He tells her the question is more important than the man who is asking it, and that the man will not be here much longer, but the question can be if she is willing to carry it. She agrees with grief that is visible in every part of her face, and with the steadiness of a person who has decided to be stronger than her grief, because the alternative is to be destroyed by it, and destruction would dishonor what she is being asked to carry. Before Seneca cuts his wrists, he finishes the letter to Lucilius. He has been composing it in his mind for hours, perhaps for years. And now he writes it out in the lamplight with the specific clarity that comes to a man when he has nothing left to protect and therefore nothing left to carefully omit. He writes about what Rome does to memory. The Roman Senate possesses a formal procedure. It is called damnatio memoriae, the condemnation of memory. It is applied when the Senate decides that a person who has died has been so damaging to Rome that his continued presence in the historical record constitutes an active threat to the current order. When the procedure is activated, a systematic erasure follows. The condemned man's name is chiseled from every public inscription where it appears. His statues are dismantled or recarved to represent someone more acceptable. His portraits are removed from public buildings. His official documents are invalidated. His existence is surgically removed from the surfaces of the city. Seneca watched this happen to Caligula after his assassination. Watched the Senate apply it with the methodical thoroughness of craftsmen completing a commission, and he noticed something that the official procedure does not acknowledge. It works, not completely, not forever, but it works in the ways that matter most in the time that power is most concerned with, which is the immediate time, the time in which the lesson must be taught and absorbed before the next challenge to the existing order presents itself. The gaps left in inscriptions where names have been chiseled away are visible as gaps, as absences, as silences in the stone where something used to be. And silence is the most manageable substance in the empire. Silence does not organize. It does not argue. It does not have a face that others can gather around. Seneca writes, "The most complete form of execution is not the death of the body. A body's death is visible, and visibility creates martyrs, and martyrs create movements. The most complete form of execution is the death of the record. Destroy the record, and you destroy the past itself, and if people who have lost their past cannot find their way back to what was done to them, or who did it, or why it mattered." He writes about the Vestal Virgins, the most sacred women in Rome. They tend the eternal flame of the goddess Vesta in the circular temple in the form of flame understood to be connected to the survival of Rome itself. They are selected between the ages of 6 and 10, and they serve for 30 years treated throughout as something between human beings and instruments of the divine, given extraordinary privilege, an extraordinary visibility, an extraordinary constraint, all three in the same breath. When one of them is accused of violating her vow of chastity, Rome faces a problem. The blood of a consecrated woman on Roman hands would be an offense to the divine order that could unravel the city's relationship with its gods. But an unpunished violation of a sacred vow threatens the flame, and the flame is Rome, and Rome cannot allow the flame to be threatened without response. The solution is what Seneca considers the most sophisticated piece of bureaucratic violence he has ever examined. You do not kill her, you bury her alive. You provide her with a small chamber underground equipped with a bed and a lamp and a quantity of bread and water sufficient to survive for a short time, and then you seal the entrance, and then you declare formally that whatever occurs next is a matter between the sacred woman and the divine order she violated. Rome has simply provided accommodations. The rest is theology, not governance, and Rome accepts no responsibility for theological outcomes. The condemned Vestal is stripped of her sacred ornaments. She is dressed in funeral clothing. She is carried through the city in a covered litter as though she is already a corpse, because in every socially meaningful sense, she already is. No one speaks to her. No one meets her eyes. She descends a staircase into a small underground room. The staircase is sealed behind her. The surface above is leveled and smoothed so that no clear marker remains of where she entered. She dies in the dark. Rome records no cause of death because Rome accepts no responsibility for the death because Rome did not kill her. Rome provided accommodations. The gods did the rest. Cornelia, the chief Vestal, will undergo this procedure in 91 AD under the Emperor Domitian. She will protest her innocence throughout the entire ceremony in a clear voice with the composure of a woman who has decided that her dignity is the one thing that cannot be taken from her if she refuses to surrender it. When the officiating priest reaches out to assist her descent into the underground chamber, she will withdraw her arm from his hand. She will not accept his touch. She will not be handled by a man whose authority she does not recognize as legitimate. She will walk down into the dark under her own power, with her back straight, and she will not look back. Seneca writes, "The most sophisticated violence is the violence that erases itself from the record of its own enactment. A system that can kill without killing, that can destroy without leaving the marks of destruction, that can erase a person while maintaining clean hands, that system has achieved something that no amount of brute force can replicate. It has made itself invisible. And a system that cannot be seen cannot be effectively contested because you cannot organize resistance against something you cannot demonstrate exists." He knows that Domitian will himself eventually undergo damnatio memoriae. He knows it the way you know the shape of a machine. After you have watched it operate long enough, you can predict its next movement because you understand its logic, not because you have read the future. Domitian will be assassinated on September 18th of 96 AD. Within days, the Senate will vote the condemnation of his memory. The erasure teams will begin their work across the empire. His name will be removed from stone. His face will be taken from monuments. Future generations of archaeologists will find only his absence in the marble, the precisely shaped holes where his name was the slightly smoother patches, where a face once looked out and now looks nowhere because it no longer exists. The absence becomes its own presence. The erasure preserves in negative the memory of what it condemned. This is the paradox at the center of damnatio memoriae, and at the center of all attempts to destroy the past through official procedure. The destruction leaves evidence of itself. You can see the chisel marks. You can see the moothstone. You can see the gap where a name was. And that gap that shapes silence tells you that something was here, that something was judged important enough to remove, that someone decided this particular memory was dangerous enough to require organized effort to eliminate. Seneca writes, "I have spent 40 years writing letters about how to be human. I have spent 16 years inside the orbit of an empire that has perfected the craft of making humans into instruments of their own subjugation. The distance between these two projects is the distance I will carry with me out of this life. I do not know whether the letters will survive. I do not know whether I have done more good or more harm in the aggregate. I do not know whether the machine will apply its memory erasure procedure to me or simply allow me to disappear through neglect, which I think is more likely because I am ultimately not important enough to the machine's self-image to require formal deletion." He writes, "The machine is not Roman. This is the thing I most need you to understand, Lucilius, now that I am writing the last letter you will receive from me. The machine is not a Roman invention. It is not a product of this particular civilization or this particular century. Rome discovered it and named its components and refined its operations to a degree of elegance that previous civilizations had only approached. But the essential mechanism, the conversion of fear into compliance of compliance, into silence of silence, into a consent that was never actually given, that mechanism is as old as the first human community that decided it needed to outlast the lifetimes of the individuals who composed it." He writes, "The 12 tables declared that punishment must mirror crime. That is what they declared. What I have observed in this city over the course of my life is that punishment does not mirror crime. Punishment defines crime. The punishment arrives first as a demonstration of what the apparatus is capable of, and the crime is subsequently defined as whatever behavior produced the need for that demonstration. The sack precedes the murder it punishes. The rock precedes the ambition it destroys. The cross precedes the rebellion it suppresses. The arena precedes the resistance it eliminates." This is not a failure of the Roman system. This is the Roman system operating exactly as designed. He sets down the pen. He calls for his physician, a man named Statius Aeneas, who has been waiting in the adjacent room with the patient professionalism of someone who understood when he arrived what he would eventually be called upon to do. He calls for his two secretaries. He dictates to them his final spoken words, words that Tacitus will later record and that will survive when almost everything else about this particular night has been absorbed into the silence that takes all ordinary moments eventually. He says, "Do not weep. Philosophy has prepared us for this. Remember more of what I taught and less of what I was. The two are not the same thing. I know this better than anyone." He extends his wrists. The physician works with quick competence. The blood that follows is slow because Seneca is 69 years old and his body has the patience of old age about it. Even in this, and his friends stand around the bath, his servants have prepared, and none of them speak because there is nothing to say that would not diminish the quality of what is happening in this room, which is a man dying in the way he chose to die, which in Rome in 65 AD is itself a form of resistance, perhaps the only form left available to him. Seneca continues to speak after the cutting. He dictates to his secretaries. He speaks for 4 hours. There are still things he needs to say, and he says them for as long as the body continues to permit it, which is what a philosopher does, which is the only form of defiance remaining to a man in his position, which is perhaps the only form of defiance that survives any position for long enough to matter. Then he is quiet. In the morning, Rome continues without him. The forum opens. The courts convene. The soldiers stand at their corners with their hands resting on their sword hilts. The slaves carry their loads through the streets. The Vestal flame burns in its circular temple, tended by women whose names history will mostly lose. The Senate meets in its chamber and reads documents that have been prepared for its reading by men whose names history will also lose. The arena schedules games for the end of the week. The road south is open to all traffic. 15 years after Seneca's death, the Emperor Titus will open the Colosseum with a celebration lasting 100 days involving 5,000 animals and an uncountable number of human beings who entered the arena in one condition and left it in another. The crowd will bring their children. The vendors will move through the stands with food and wine. The mechanical lifts in the hypogeum will raise animals and condemn men through the trap doors in the arena floor with the smooth precision that Roman engineering makes possible. The crowd will applaud. The children will remember it for the rest of their lives as one of the great spectacles of their childhood. 30 years after Seneca's death, the Emperor Domitian will order the chief Vestal Cornelia buried alive. She will descend into her underground chamber with her dignity intact and her arm withdrawn from the priest's unwanted hand. 31 years after Seneca's death, Domitian will be assassinated. The Senate will condemn his memory. His name will come out of the stone across the empire. His face will disappear from monuments. His shaped absence will be precisely maintained and permanent, and the machinery will continue. Not because the machinery is Roman, not because there is something uniquely cruel about the people who built it and operated it, because there is none. They are human beings exactly like all human beings before and after them, capable of extraordinary tenderness and extraordinary violence, in proportions determined largely by what the surrounding system incentivizes and what it punishes. The machinery continues because it solves a problem that every sufficiently large human community eventually confronts. The problem of how to maintain enough compliance among enough people that the critical mass required for fundamental change never quite assembles itself. The machinery solves this problem with an elegance that purely physical force could never achieve. It creates consequences that are visible enough to deter, but ambiguous enough to deny. It makes resistance feel personal and isolated and futile while making compliance feel like wisdom, like realism, like the mature recognition of how things work. It recruits the potentially resistant into its own enforcement mechanisms, exactly as Rome recruited soldiers into the practice of decimation, exactly as it recruited the Senate into the ritual of damnatio memoriae, exactly as it recruited Seneca himself into the drafting of documents he recognized as lies in the moment he was writing them. The genius of the machinery is not in its cruelty. Its cruelty is a byproduct, not a design feature. The genius is in its capacity to make every person inside it feel at least partially responsible for its continuation, and therefore at least partially unable to condemn it without condemning themselves. Seneca understood all of this. He wrote about it with clarity and precision and moral seriousness across 40 years of letters. He also participated in the machinery for 16 years while writing about it, which is either the most complete indictment of his character that can be assembled from the available evidence, or the most honest portrait of what it costs to be a human being inside a system that is larger than any individual's capacity to resist it, or both of these things simultaneously, which is the category of truth that is most difficult to hold in the mind because it requires accepting that intelligence and complicity are not mutually exclusive, that understanding a system does not automatically confer the power to stand outside it. The letters to Lucilius survived, all 124 of them. They survived because they were copied by hand again and again by people across the centuries who found in them something they recognized as necessary. They moved through the Mediterranean world and into the libraries of the early medieval period, and then into the monasteries of Europe where monks living inside their own powerful institutions they partly believed in and partly feared, copied them again, and kept them and passed them into the next century and the century after that. Seneca's name was never condemned. Rome did not apply damnatio memoriae to him. Perhaps he was too small a figure in the imperial record to merit the effort. Perhaps his letters already in wide circulation before his death made erasure impractical. Perhaps the men who might have ordered the erasure were occupied with the erasure of people they considered more dangerous. His absence from the record has a different character from the absences created by damnatio memoriae. He is not removed from the stone. He simply stops. The letters continue past his death. The man who wrote them does not. And in the space where the man stops the question, he was composing at his writing table on that November night, in 65 AD continues forward with the specific persistence of questions that have not been answered, and therefore do not know they are supposed to stop. What does it mean to understand a system with complete clarity, to document its mechanisms with precision and intellectual honesty, to spend a lifetime writing about its cruelties with unflinching accuracy, and still be unable to place yourself entirely outside it? Rome fell. It took 4 more centuries after Seneca's death, and the falling was not clean or sudden or dramatic. It frayed and contracted and was renegotiated across generations until what remained was no longer recognizable as what it had been. The roads remained. The law remained embedded in the legal systems of nations that would not exist for 1,000 years after the last Roman garrison left its post. The architectural language remained the arches and vaults and domes that became the visual vocabulary of authority for every Western civilization that followed. And something else remained that was never inscribed in stone and never named in any official document. The 12 tables are gone destroyed in the fires and wars of 2 millennia. But the logic they encoded, the logic that punishment is performance, that the spectacle of consequence, it is the primary technology of social control, that individual bodies and minds and memories are resources to be converted into demonstrations of institutional power, that logic required no monument to survive. It was internalized. It was reproduced like Seneca's letters, not in stone, but in practice, in the thousand small decisions made daily by people who had grown up inside systems running on the same essential mechanism and who had come to experience that mechanism as simply the way things are. The Tarpeian Rock is a tourist site now. You can stand at its edge and look down at the forum, and the information signs will explain the history in multiple languages, and the view is genuinely remarkable, and the stone is warm in the afternoon sun. The Via Appia is a park. People run along it on weekend mornings. The Colosseum is illuminated at night for special occasions, and the photographs that visitors take of it are beautiful in the way that human ambition expressed in stone across 20 centuries is always beautiful, which is to say beautifully and completely indifferent to what the stone was built to commemorate. Beneath the Colosseum, the hypogeum still exists. The mechanisms that raised animals and condemned men through the trap doors into the arena, light are mostly gone, but the channels and chambers they occupied remain. You can stand in the hypogeum on a guided tour and look upward through the gaps in the arena floor at the sky above the same quality of Roman light that fell on 50,000 people watching someone die in the name of order on an ordinary afternoon in the first century of the Common Era. Seneca looked at that sky. He wrote about it in a letter to Lucilius, one of the early letters before the years inside the machinery had taken the specific toll that years inside any machinery eventually take. He wrote that the sky is the one thing in Rome that belongs to no one, and therefore to everyone, the one element of the city that the state has not yet found a method of appropriating. He may have been wrong about that, but it was a good sentence and it was honest when he wrote it, and honesty at the moment of writing is perhaps all that can be asked of any letter. The letters are still there if you choose to read them, all 124. A man working to understand from inside a system, he could not exit what the system was doing and why, and what a person might do about it who lacked the power to stop it and lacked the will to pretend it was not happening, and was left therefore with only the third option, which is to describe it as accurately as possible, and trust that the description will find its way to someone for whom it is useful. He never found the answer to the question at the center of his life. He left the question instead preserved in 124 letters, copied by hand, across 15 centuries into a world he could not have imagined, but might encountering it now recognize in its essential structure. The machinery is still running. He would know it immediately. He would sit down and write a letter about it.